Okay, students, I just want to start right here by talking about good writing practices. This is going to come from my own research on, writing and what works out best for published authors and students. In my own class, I try and make the argument that good writing is clear, credible, and adds, meaning to the world, and you are all have lots of good things to add to the world. So I try and encourage that in my classes. It is also a process. I know this is like something that's really pushed back on because I think there's definitely times when you've been able to just sit down and write something within an hour and got an A on it, and I think that's great. I've been able to do that too. But in college, it's going to be harder and harder for you to do that. And one thing that this class and other classes are going to be aimed at is teaching you how to think critically. And really to do that, you've got to take some time doing these different steps. Writing, pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, publishing, and there's, as this shows, it's not necessarily a linear process, but you do have to make sure you're touching base with all those steps. So the dreaded blank page is something that lots of students fear. I don't know if you've ever had that experience of sitting down at a computer and not knowing what to write. So the pre-writing stage is the first stage in the writing process. And one of the best things for helping with that staring at a blank stage fear that is very real. So this is a nice quote from Annie Murphy Paul. She said, "Our brains, it might be said, are like magpies, fashioning their finished products from the materials around them, weaving the bits and pieces they find into their trains of thought." So, like birds are sitting there on a tree. If they want to build a nest, they've got to get up and they've got to fly around and find the different pieces that they need for their nest. So just like birds, we can't just sit in our, study or wherever we are and expect the words just to come to us. We've got to get up and find those different thoughts and pieces of information that are going to help us fashion our whatever our written product is. So the pre-writing stage is what helps us gather those bits of information so we have something to say. So pre-writing can encapsulate a lot of different things, just writing bulleted list of ideas on a piece of paper. Mind maps are something that help a lot of people. This is kind of just, free writing your ideas, and then just branching out with different subtopics from there. Obviously, the research stage is a really important part of gathering your thoughts and ideas, and we'll go into that a bit more as the class goes on. And if your brain works this way, outlines can be really helpful. I don't always write outlines, but when I do, I find that they cut my writing time in half, or significantly reduce my writing time, because I've already kind of thought through my ideas and organized them. So then I'm just saying, okay, now I'm going to talk about this paragraph right here, right? So those are all things that I recommend as you do the writing projects for this class. They are not necessarily things I'm going to grade, but I will see the benefits of them, and you will too in the grades you get in the class. Okay, so after you do the pre-writing stage, the next thing you want to do is sit down and write. So Ralph Keyes has said, serious writers write, inspired or not. Over time, they discover that routine is a better friend than inspiration. And that's what I would recommend to you as well. Find a time that you're going to regularly write and a place that you're regularly going to write in, and show up for yourself regularly to get those projects done. That's something I have to do with organizing courses. It's something I have to do with writing. I find that as I am consistent with that schedule, it becomes easier and easier for me to have things to talk about. There's just something about showing up in the same time, same place, and getting ready to write that just helps ease that along. So that would be something I would highly recommend to you as you're writing. And if there are sometimes, you kind of have to, it's not necessarily the same time every day, but just the same consistent schedule is fine. I understand you guys have a lot going on in your lives. And if there are times when you're like, I really don't feel like writing, I would still recommend showing up for yourself and sitting down and putting at least 10 minutes in. I promise you'll get something out of those 10 minutes, unless you're just really grumpy and then you delete everything, not that I've ever done that, but don't do that. But you'll get something out of just putting the time in every time. Okay, the next part of the writing process is editing. And editing and revising are two separate processes. So make sure you kind of get that in your thoughts as you're doing them. Most people who write find that their first draft of anything is, as CJ Shera says right here, is garbage and does not resemble what they wanted the final draft to look like. But it's given them a good start. So if you find that's you, that is me for sure. Don't feel like you're weird. Most writers are like that. They have to revise and edit until they get something that they like better. So as you're revising, the first thing you want to look at is the first thing you want to look at is the purpose. Are you meeting the grading criteria? Are you doing what you've set out to do? That's the first thing to look at. The next thing is to think about the structure. What have you included in there? Have you put it in a logical order? You might need to have a friend read it and say, hey, does this make sense? But definitely those two things are important to look at before you're looking at the grammar and fixing the sentences and the spelling and things like that. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about revising and editing. I'm not going to talk about publishing because publishing is, getting it out there in the world. But that is an important part of the writing process. In our class, it will be mostly consist of submitting assignments to me, sometimes publishing things for your peers to look at. But there's not a whole lot to say about that other than that is part of it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this theory of what good writing looks like. Clarity, I didn't really have a slide for, but making sure you're writing clear means having a good structure for your writing, making sure that you're specific in your nouns and your organization is well set up. So that's going to tie into the format of your essay. Beyond that, you also want to make sure your writing is credible. That's also going to play in the format of the essay. If it looks like what other essays look like, that's going to help you look like a good writer, which is what we want, right? It's part of what we call the body of scholarly conversation. That's where you have looked at research, you've thought about it, and you're going to talk back to the conversation now in your paper, right? And then with that, it's making sure that you've properly included that research in your paper. And including good research in your paper is important. Don't feel like, oh, I have to say everything on my own. No, you want to include what other people have said. It makes you seem like you know more, which you do. Okay, so here's an example of what the format should look like in MLA format. That is the formatting style that we use in English classes. For other classes, it will be different. Science classes, it's APA. I think history classes are often Chicago. You just want to be familiar with how they want you to set up your paper for your different classes, and make sure you're following those guidelines. As far as including credible research, that would mean two things. That means, I guess under assuming thing is that you've done your research. Then within the body of your written text that you're including quotes from people. Paraphrases and summaries would also tie into this, and you're giving credit to them within the body of your paper, but also on a works cited page. So this is kind of what an in-text citation would look like. Some use the system of oppression in our country to further separate the haves from the have-nots because they believe that although all are equal, some are more equal than others. And then I have, so first of all, this quote comes directly from the novel Animal Farm. Couldn't remember what it was. So I've got it that the actual text that comes from that book is within quotation marks. Now, because it started with a sentence, I've changed the uppercase A here to a lowercase a, and I've included that, I've indicated that I made a change by putting that specific part of the word in brackets. If you feel like it's necessary to include a word for grammar for your sentence to make more sense, you could also, put in an and or he or the or something like that within brackets, and that just tells your reader, hey, this is a little different. And then I did not include something was here and here and here, and I took something out, and I just indicated that there was something there that I took out by putting 3 ellipses here. So I'm still saying this is all a quote from this book because I have it within quotation marks. And that's what you need to do anytime you include like exact words and phrases. Even if it's 2 words together, you should have them within quotation marks. And then after you include it, you should have the last name of the author and the location tag, which in case of a book is a page number, and then your period or punctuation at the end. So this is what I would expect to see for your in-text citations. Now that's going to take me to a source that you have at the end of your page, which is a works cited page, or you might hear it called a bibliography page. And that would be, this isn't, I didn't do the exact book I had here, but that would mean you're going to give me the exact details of what that source is. So here it would have been Orwell George and Animal Farm, and then I would have said where it was published and stuff. So those are the 2 things you need for your to include research in your paper. And that is a way of showing, hey, I've done this research and I'm really smart and now I'm going to talk about it. So it's a good thing to include in your paper. Okay, so I kind of briefly mentioned clarity and having the structure of the paper. This is going to go into a bit more of that. So in your introduction paragraph, I'm looking that there's a hook or some way to engage the reader, and that you have a clear and specific thesis or argument for your paper. The body paragraphs, they're going to have 1 clear main purpose per paragraph, and each of them are going to further this point that you made in your thesis. The conclusion, sometimes where students are like, I don't know what to do. A conclusion summarizes what you've already said. You don't have to lay everything out sentence by sentence, but you should kind of just remind your reader of what your paper was about, and then you end with a clear call to action or so what, a final thought you want to leave your reader with. Okay. As far as the content goes, as we talked, you're going to have credible research throughout. You should have a neutral academic tone, so you shouldn't use personal pronouns, contractions, or slang language. And then everything should be insightful. You have some good ideas. Make sure you explain all of those clearly. And trust that you have good ideas, because you do. I think the thing that students run into the most with this is they say something that they think is clear, but they haven't really explained it. And that hurts their paper because the reader doesn't know how you're thinking about that. So make sure you clearly explain all those ideas. Again, with specific nouns, with clearly explaining the thoughts you had, clearly explaining quotes, all that kind of thing. All right, this was long enough, but if you have any questions, please reach out and I'm happy to help.